The great hall of Meridian Prime stretched across 3 kilometers of polished metal and crystal, its ceiling lost in the shadows above where strange alien technologies hummed with quiet power. Dr. Ray Thompson walked slowly through the entrance, his simple earth-made clothing looking plain against the elaborate forms of the assembled delegates. The Galactic Scientific Summit happened only once every 50 years, and this was the first time humanity had been invited to attend. Ray adjusted his tablet computer and looked around at the incredible sight before him. The Keth delegates stood, in perfect formation, their crystalline bodies catching the light from a dozen different suns that shone through the hall's transparent dome. Each crystal being was as tall as a building, their surfaces covered in mathematical equations that glowed and shifted like living things. These were the greatest mathematicians in the galaxy, beings whose minds could process calculations that would take human computers years to complete. Near the center of the hall, the Vorlak representatives floated in their containment fields, their gas-formed bodies swirling with colors that had no names in human language. Ray had read that a single Vorlak could think 17 different thoughts at the same time, each one as complex as the greatest human philosophers had ever managed. They communicated through patterns of light and chemical signals that most other species needed machines to understand. The Praxis Collective occupied an entire section of the hall, thousands of small insect-like beings that moved as one mind. When they spoke, it was with a single voice that came from every member at once, creating a sound like gentle thunder that filled the space with harmony. They had been working together for over 1,000,000 years, their shared consciousness growing stronger with each passing generation. Ray found his assigned seat in the human section, a small area that seemed almost forgotten in the corner of the great hall. Only 12 humans had been invited to this summit, and they were clearly the newest and least respected members of the galactic community. Earth had only made contact with alien civilizations 15 years ago, and most of the galaxy still saw humans as primitive creatures who had barely learned to leave their home planet. The ceremony began with the traditional greeting songs, sounds, that came from creatures whose vocal cords had evolved on worlds with different atmospheres and gravity. Ray listened politely as the translations came through his earpiece, understanding that this was both an honor and a test. Humanity was being allowed to observe the greatest scientific minds in the galaxy as they discussed their most important work. The Altarian Prime Minister stepped forward, his tall blue form moving with the grace of someone who had lived for over 1,000 years. His voice carried the weight of authority as he spoke about the purpose of this gathering, the great challenge that had brought all these species together after centuries of separate attempts. We are here to discuss the temporal displacement equation, the Prime Minister announced, his words causing a ripple of excitement through the assembled crowd. For 300 standard years, the greatest minds of our civilizations have worked on this problem. The Keth have dedicated their most powerful crystal matrices to its solution. The Vorlak have created thinking patterns that exist in dimensions beyond normal space. The Praxis Collective has grown new sections of their consciousness specifically to tackle this challenge. Ray leaned forward in his seat, his curiosity sparked by the reverence in the alien leader's voice. The equation appeared on the massive, holographic display that dominated the center of the hall, symbols and numbers flowing like water across a space the size of a football field. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, a mathematical construct that seemed to pulse with its own life. The Keth High mathematician stepped forward, her crystal body ringing with harmonic frequencies that the translation devices struggled to convert into words. The equation describes the instantaneous transportation of matter across vast distances, she explained, her voice like music made of mathematics. If solved, it would allow us to move ships, cargo, and people from one star system to another in no time at all. Trade routes that now take months would become instant. Emergency aid could reach any world in moments. The galaxy would become as connected as the planets in a single system. The Vorlak speaker swirled his gaseous form into complex patterns as he continued the explanation. But the equation contains what we call the infinite problem. Every time We approach a solution, we encounter a mathematical loop that has no end. Our greatest computers have worked for decades on single attempts, only to crash when they reach this barrier. We have tried every approach our sciences can imagine, yet the solution remains beyond our reach. Ray stared at the equation, his mind automatically beginning to work through the symbols and relationships. It was incredibly complex, involving mathematics that humanity had only recently begun to understand. But there was something about it that felt familiar, like a puzzle he had seen before in a different form. The Praxis Collective spoke in their unified voice, thousands of beings contributing to a single thought. We have consumed the resources of entire worlds in our attempts to solve this problem. Crystal computers the size of moons have been built and destroyed in the effort. The equation has become the greatest challenge in galactic history, a test of whether intelligence itself has limits that cannot be overcome. As the presentations continued, Ray found himself sketching parts of the equation on his tablet, breaking it down into smaller pieces that his human mind could more easily understand. The aliens spoke of their failed attempts with the reverence of pilgrims describing a holy quest, their voices filled with both determination and frustration. The ceremony lasted for hours, with each species presenting their latest failed attempts and theoretical approaches. Ray listened to descriptions of computational methods that used the gravity of black holes to process information, of quantum experiments that lasted for decades, of mathematical proofs that filled libraries with their complexity. When the formal presentations ended, the delegates began to separate into smaller groups, discussing the finer points of their work in languages that had evolved on worlds Ray could barely imagine. He remained in his seat, staring at the equation that still glowed on the great display, feeling the weight of 3 centuries of failure pressing down on the hall like a physical thing. The other human delegates were already making polite conversation with some of the more approachable alien species, but Ray found himself drawn to the mathematics itself. There was something about the way the equation was structured, something that reminded him of problems he had encountered in his own research back on Earth. The infinite loop that had stumped the greatest minds in the galaxy looked familiar, like an old friend wearing an elaborate disguise. The observation deck of Meridian Prime's Great Hall offered a perfect view of the planet's 3 moons, each one a different color in the alien sky. Ray had excused himself from the formal dinner, claiming he needed time to process the day's presentations. The truth was simpler. He wanted to be alone with the equation. His tablet sat on the curved metal railing, its small screen displaying the copied portions of the temporal displacement equation that he had managed to sketch during the ceremony. The full equation was far too complex to capture completely, but he had focused on the section that seemed to cause the infinite loop that had stumped the alien mathematicians for centuries. Ray had always been good at seeing patterns where others saw chaos. His grandmother had taught him to solve crossword puzzles when he was young, showing him how the most difficult clues often had the simplest answers hiding in plain sight. "Don't try to be too clever," she used to say while they worked together at her kitchen table. Sometimes the obvious answer is the right one, even when it seems too easy. The alien species had approached the equation with reverence and complexity, building massive computational systems and developing new branches of mathematics to tackle the problem. Their presentations had been filled with technical language and theoretical frameworks that stretched the limits of what their translation devices could handle. But as Ray stared at the symbols on his tablet, he began to see something they had missed. The equation was not just a mathematical construct. It was describing a physical process, the actual movement of matter through space and time. The aliens had been treating it like a pure mathematical problem, something that existed only in the realm of numbers and abstract concepts, but Ray could see that it was trying to describe something real, something that happened in the physical universe. He started sketching modifications on his tablet, not to the equation itself, but to the framework around it. The infinite loop that crashed every alien computer was not a bug in their mathematics. It was a feature of reality itself, the way the universe actually worked when matter was displaced across vast distances. Ray thought about the problems he had worked on during his graduate studies, equations that described the behavior of quantum particles in ways that seemed to violate common sense. The quantum world was full of paradoxes and impossibilities that only made sense when you stopped trying to force them into classical frameworks. What if the temporal displacement equation was the same kind of problem? He began to work through the mathematics in his head, using the simple approach his professors had taught him during his training. Instead of trying to eliminate the infinite loop, what if they embraced it? What if the apparent mathematical impossibility was actually the key to making the whole system work? The idea was so simple that it felt wrong. The greatest minds in the galaxy had spent centuries trying to solve this problem, building computers the size of planets and developing mathematical theories that pushed the boundaries of knowledge itself. How could a human who had only seen the equation for a few hours possibly find something they had missed? But as Ray worked through the implications of his idea, the mathematics began to fall into place with surprising elegance. The infinite loop was not an obstacle to be overcome. It was the engine that powered the entire process, the mechanism that allowed matter to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. Before resolving into its final destination, he sketched diagrams on his tablet, showing how the equation could be restructured to harness the infinite loop instead of trying to eliminate it. The solution required thinking about the problem in a completely different way, abandoning the assumption that the loop was an error and instead treating it as an essential component of the system. Ray worked through the night, his excitement growing as each piece of the puzzle fell into place. The alien mathematicians had been trying to stop a river from flowing instead of building a water wheel to harness its power. They had been so focused on mathematical purity that they had forgotten the physical reality the equation was meant to describe. By dawn, he had filled 17 pages of his tablet with sketches and calculations. The solution was elegant in its simplicity, requiring no massive computational systems or revolutionary new mathematics. It just needed a different way of thinking about the problem, a willingness to accept that the infinite loop was not a failure but a success. Ray walked back through the empty halls of the conference center, his mind still buzzing with the implications of what he had discovered. The other delegates were still sleeping in their various atmospheric quarters, preparing for another day of formal presentations and theoretical discussions. None of them knew that the problem they had spent centuries trying to solve had been cracked by a human with a simple tablet computer. He found himself in the Great Hall again, staring up at the massive holographic display that still showed the temporal displacement equation. In a few hours, the assembly would reconvene, and the alien delegates would continue their discussions about failed attempts and theoretical approaches. Ray wondered if he should keep his discovery to himself, at least until he had more time to check his work, but the mathematics were solid, and the physical principles made sense. The solution was not just theoretically possible, but practically achievable with technology that most spacefaring civilizations already possessed. The only thing that had been missing was the insight that the infinite loop was not a problem to be solved, but a tool to be used. Ray thought about his grandmother and her crossword puzzles, about the way she had taught him to look for simple answers to complex problems. The greatest mathematical challenge in galactic history had been solved not through superior intelligence or massive computational power, but through the peculiar way human minds approach the impossible. He spent the morning double-checking his calculations, making sure that every step of the solution was correct. The mathematics held up under scrutiny, and the physical principles were sound. The infinite loop that had crashed alien computers for centuries could be tamed with a simple change in perspective, a willingness to work with the equation's natural behavior instead of fighting against it. When the other delegates began to arrive for the second day of the summit, Ray was ready to share his discovery. He had prepared a simple presentation that would walk them through the solution step by step, showing how the problem that had stumped the galaxy's greatest minds could be solved with basic mathematics and a fundamental shift in thinking. The alien delegates took their places in the Great Hall, their various forms and technologies creating a spectacular display of galactic diversity. Ray waited in the human section, his tablet containing the solution that would change everything. He knew that what he was about to share would revolutionize transportation across the galaxy, connecting distant worlds in ways that had been impossible. For centuries, the moment had come to show the galaxy that sometimes the newest species could offer the freshest perspective, that human creativity and intuitive problem-solving could triumph over alien academic complexity. Ray stood up, his simple, human form small against the grandeur of the assembled delegates, and prepared to change the course of galactic history. The morning session of the Galactic Scientific Summit began with the traditional harmony of crystalline chimes that resonated through the Great Hall. Ray sat in his assigned seat, his tablet resting on his knees, containing the solution that had kept him awake all night. The Altarian Prime Minister called for new presentations, inviting any delegate who had fresh insights to share their work with the Assembly. Ray stood up slowly, his human form seeming insignificant among the towering crystal beings and swirling gas forms that surrounded him. A ripple of surprise passed through the hall as the other delegates noticed the movement from the human section. The translation devices struggled to convey the various expressions of curiosity and mild amusement that came from species who had not expected the newest members of the galactic community to contribute to such an advanced discussion. I request permission to present a potential solution to the temporal displacement equation, Ray said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's advanced acoustic systems. The words seemed to hang in the air, creating a moment of stunned silence that stretched across the vast space. The Keth, high mathematician's crystal body rang with harmonic frequencies that the translation devices converted into laughter. Honored human delegate, she said, her voice carrying the gentle condescension of someone speaking to a child. We appreciate your enthusiasm, but this equation has challenged our greatest minds for 3 centuries. Perhaps you would benefit from observing our methods before attempting to contribute to the discussion. The Vorlak representative swirled his gaseous form into patterns that suggested polite skepticism. The human species has been aware of this problem for less than 1 day, he pointed out, his chemical communications creating colors that the translation system described as amused disbelief. Our civilization has dedicated computational resources equivalent to the energy output of entire suns to this challenge. With respect, what could your species possibly offer that we have not already considered? The Praxis Collective buzzed with rapid internal communications before speaking with their unified voice. We do not wish to discourage scientific curiosity, they said, their words carrying the weight of 1,000,000 minds speaking as one. But the temporal displacement equation exists at the very limits of mathematical possibility. Our attempts to solve it have consumed the resources of worlds and the lifetimes of our greatest thinkers. Ray felt the weight of their skepticism pressing down on him like a physical force. Every species in the hall was looking at him with expressions that ranged from polite curiosity to barely concealed amusement. He was a representative of the youngest spacefaring civilization in the galaxy, a species that had only recently learned to leave their home planet, claiming to have solved a problem that had stumped the most advanced minds in known space. I understand your doubts, Ray said, walking toward the center of the hall where the massive holographic display waited. But sometimes a fresh perspective can see things that familiarity has hidden. May I show you what I have found? The Altarian Prime Minister gestured with one long blue hand, his ancient eyes showing the patience of someone who had lived for over 1,000 years. Very well, human delegate, present your findings. We will listen with the courtesy that scientific discourse requires. Ray activated his tablet and began uploading his work to the great display. The symbols and equations appeared on the holographic screen. Simple human mathematics mixed with the alien symbols he had copied from the original equation. The presentation looked crude compared to the elaborate theoretical frameworks that the other species had shown, but the mathematics were clear and logical. The infinite loop that has stopped all your attempts is not a mathematical error. Ray began, his voice growing stronger as he found his rhythm. It is the physical reality of how matter behaves when it is displaced across vast distances. You have been trying to eliminate the loop, but the loop is not your enemy. It is your power source. He highlighted sections of his work showing how the equation could be restructured to harness the infinite loop instead of trying to overcome it. The mathematics were surprisingly simple, requiring no revolutionary new theories or massive computational systems. It just needed a different way of thinking about the problem. The Keth delegates' crystal bodies dimmed as they processed the implications of what Ray was showing them. Their harmonic frequencies shifted into patterns that suggested confusion and growing concern. The Vorlak representative's gaseous form swirled faster, creating chemical signals that the translation devices struggled to interpret. This is impossible. The Praxis Collective said, their unified voice carrying a note of distress that Ray had not heard before. If this approach is correct, then our entire methodology has been fundamentally wrong. We have been trying to solve a problem that did not need to be solved. Ray continued his presentation, walking the assembly through each step of his solution. He showed them how the infinite loop could be controlled and directed, how the apparent mathematical impossibility was actually the mechanism that made instantaneous transportation possible. The equation did not need to be conquered. It needed to be understood and embraced. The Alterian Prime Minister leaned forward in his seat, his ancient eyes fixed on the display with growing amazement. You are suggesting that we have been approaching this problem incorrectly for 3 centuries, he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who was beginning to understand the magnitude of what was being presented. That all our attempts to eliminate the infinite loop have been working against the natural behavior of the equation itself. Exactly, Ray replied, his confidence growing as he saw the recognition beginning to dawn in the alien delegates' expressions. The loop is not a bug in your mathematics. It is a feature of reality. When matter is displaced across vast distances, it must exist in multiple states simultaneously before resolving into its final location. The infinite loop is how the universe handles that process. He showed them diagrams that illustrated the physical principles behind his solution, using simple analogies that made the complex mathematics easier to understand. The quantum world was full of paradoxes that only made sense when you stopped trying to force them into classical frameworks. The temporal displacement equation was the same kind of problem, requiring a willingness to accept that reality sometimes worked in ways that seemed impossible. The hall fell silent as the implications of Ray's presentation sank in. The greatest mathematical challenge in galactic history had been solved not through superior intelligence or massive computational power, but through a simple change in perspective. The human delegate who had been in the room for less than 24 hours had found the answer that had eluded the greatest minds in the galaxy for centuries. The Keth mathematician's crystal body resonated with frequencies that the translation devices converted into words filled with amazement and disbelief. If this solution is correct, she said, her harmonic voice carrying a note of wonder, then we have been building monuments to our own misunderstanding. Every failed attempt, every crashed computer, every theoretical framework we have constructed has been based on the assumption that the infinite loop was an obstacle to overcome. The Vorlek representative's gaseous form swirled into patterns that suggested deep thought and growing excitement. The elegance of this solution is remarkable, he admitted, his chemical communications creating colors that the translation system described as reluctant admiration. It requires no new mathematics, no revolutionary theories, no massive computational systems. It simply requires us to think about the problem differently. The Praxis Collective buzzed with rapid internal communications, their unified consciousness, processing the implications of what they had just witnessed. We must test this solution, they said, their voice carrying the authority of a million minds working in perfect harmony. If the human delegate is correct, then we stand at the threshold of a new era in galactic civilization. Ray stood in the center of the Great Hall, surrounded by the most advanced species in the galaxy, feeling the weight of history pressing down on him. He had come to this summit as a representative of humanity's newest and least respected civilization. Now he was being asked to prove that his species could contribute something unique to the galactic community. Something that their superior intelligence and advanced technology had missed. The moment had come to show whether human intuition and creative problem-solving could triumph over alien academic complexity, whether the newest species in the galaxy could offer the perspective that had been missing for 3 centuries of failure. The construction of the testing facility on Meridian Prime's largest moon took 3 days, with engineering teams from every major species working around the clock to build the equipment according to Ray's specifications. The human delegate found himself at the center of the most important scientific experiment in galactic history, directing alien engineers whose technology was centuries ahead of anything Earth had ever produced. The test chamber was a marvel of cooperative engineering, combining Keth crystalline computation matrices with Vorlek quantum field generators and Praxis collective networking systems. The Alterian supervisors coordinated the construction with the efficiency of a species that had been building wonders for millennia, their blue forms moving gracefully through the complex machinery as they made final adjustments. Ray stood in the control room, watching through reinforced transparent metal as the final components were installed. His simple human tablet looked primitive compared to the alien control systems that surrounded him, but the mathematics it contained were about to be tested by the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. The test object was elegantly simple. A metal sphere about the size of a human fist, inscribed with the seal of the Alterian Council and embedded with quantum tracking devices that would monitor its condition throughout the transportation process. If Ray's solution worked, the sphere would be transported instantly from the test chamber to a receiver station on the planet's surface, 12,000 kilometers away. The alien delegates had gathered in the observation galleries that surrounded the test chamber, their various forms creating a spectacular display of galactic diversity. The Keth mathematicians had focused their crystalline computational power on monitoring every aspect of the experiment, their harmonic frequencies creating a complex symphony of calculation that filled the chamber with mathematical music. The Vorlek representatives floated in their containment fields, their gaseous forms swirling with patterns that suggested intense concentration. They had dedicated 17 parallel thought streams to analyzing different aspects of the test, each one capable of processing information at speeds that would overwhelm most other species. The Praxis Collective had expanded their presence for the occasion, bringing additional members to the moon until their unified consciousness could devote its full attention to the experiment. Their buzzing communications created a constant background hum that spoke of millions of minds working. In perfect harmony, Ray made final adjustments to the equipment, his hands steady despite the magnitude of the moment. The failure of this test would not just prove his solution wrong. It would demonstrate that humanity had nothing to contribute to the galactic community beyond their novelty as the newest spacefaring species. All systems are ready for initialization, announced the Alterian chief engineer, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had overseen the construction of wonders that spanned solar systems. The temporal displacement field generators are calibrated according to the human delegate's specifications. The infinite loop parameters have been set to embrace rather than eliminate the mathematical paradox. The control room fell silent as Ray approached the primary control interface. The alien technology responded to his touch with surprising ease, the systems adapting to human neural patterns with the flexibility that came from centuries of interspecies cooperation. The main display showed the test sphere sitting in the center of the chamber, its metal surface gleaming under the artificial lights. "Beginning temporal displacement sequence," Ray announced, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's communication system. The words felt strange in his mouth, describing a process that had been theoretical for centuries and was now about to become reality. The sphere began to glow with an ethereal light that seemed to come from within the metal itself. The quantum tracking devices embedded in its surface registered the beginning of the displacement process, showing readings that had never been recorded in any previous experiment. The infinite loop that had crashed alien computers for centuries was now humming with controlled power, its mathematical impossibility harnessed to serve the purposes of reality. Energy readings spiked across the control room displays, showing patterns that the alien observers had never seen before. The Keth mathematicians' crystal bodies rang with frequencies that expressed amazement and disbelief as they watched their instruments register the impossible. The Vorlak representatives' gaseous forms swirled with colors that suggested excitement and wonder. The Praxis Collective's unified voice filled the chamber as they announced their observations. The infinite loop is stable and controlled, they reported, their words carrying the authority of millions of minds working in perfect harmony. The mathematical paradox is not destroying the system but powering it exactly as the human delegate predicted. Ray watched the displays with growing excitement as the test proceeded according to his calculations. The sphere's glow intensified, and the quantum tracking devices showed readings that indicated the beginning of the displacement process. The matter that made up the sphere was entering the quantum state that would allow it to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. Before resolving into its final destination, the energy levels continued to rise, reaching peaks that would have destroyed any previous experimental apparatus. But the equipment built according to Ray's specifications was designed to work with the infinite loop rather than against it, channeling the mathematical paradox into useful work instead of trying to eliminate it. A brilliant flash filled the test chamber, so bright that the automated systems darkened the observation windows to protect the assembled delegates. When the light faded, the chamber was empty. The metal sphere had vanished, leaving only the quantum tracking devices to record the success of the displacement process. The control room erupted in a cacophony of alien voices as the different species tried to express their amazement in languages that had evolved on worlds scattered across the galaxy. The Keth mathematicians' crystal bodies created a symphony of harmonic frequencies that spoke of mathematical beauty beyond their previous understanding. The Vorlak representatives' gaseous forms swirled with colors that had no names in any known language. Communications from the surface receiver station confirmed the success within moments. The metal sphere had arrived at its destination intact and unchanged, its quantum tracking devices showing that the transportation had been instantaneous. The impossible had become reality, and the greatest mathematical challenge in galactic history had been solved by a human with a simple tablet computer. The Alterian Prime Minister's voice cut through the celebration with the authority of someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. "The test has been successful," he announced, his words carrying the weight of history. "The temporal displacement equation has been solved and the age of instantaneous transportation has begun." Ray stood in the center of the control room, surrounded by the most advanced species in the galaxy, feeling the weight of what had just been accomplished. The solution that had seemed so simple to his human mind had proven to be correct, validating the peculiar way that his species approached impossible problems. The alien delegates began to approach him, their various forms expressing respect and amazement in ways that pushed the limits of their translation devices. The Keth High mathematician's crystal body resonated with frequencies that spoke of mathematical beauty and profound recognition. The Vorlak representatives created chemical signals that conveyed admiration and wonder. The Praxis Collective's unified voice filled the chamber as they spoke for the first time directly to Ray. "Human delegate," they said, their words carrying the authority of millions of minds working in perfect harmony, "you have given the galaxy a gift that will transform civilization itself. The barriers between worlds will fall, and the species of the galaxy will be united in ways that were impossible before this day." Ray looked out through the observation windows at the empty test chamber, thinking about the simple solution that had unlocked the greatest mathematical challenge in galactic history. His grandmother would have been proud to see how her lessons about finding simple answers to complex problems had changed the course of galactic civilization. The age of instantaneous transportation had begun, and humanity had earned its place among the stars, not through superior technology or advanced mathematics, but through the peculiar gift of human creativity and the willingness to see solutions where others saw only impossible problems. The news of the successful test spread across the galaxy with the speed of quantum communication networks, reaching every inhabited world within hours of the experiment's completion. Ray found himself at the center of a storm of attention that he had never imagined possible, with representatives from hundreds of species requesting audiences, interviews, and collaborative opportunities. The Alterian Council convened an emergency session to discuss the implications of the breakthrough. Their ancient chambers filled with delegates who had traveled from across the galaxy to witness the beginning of a new age. The temporal displacement equation that had stumped the greatest minds in known space for 3 centuries was now being implemented in testing facilities on dozens of worlds, with each successful trial proving that humanity's gift to the galaxy was both real and revolutionary. Ray stood before the assembled council, his simple human form a stark contrast to the elaborate technologies and exotic physiologies that surrounded him. The Alterian Prime Minister, his blue skin gleaming in the chamber's soft light, spoke with the gravitas of someone who had watched civilizations rise and fall across the centuries. Dr. Ray Thompson of Earth, the Prime Minister began, his voice carrying the weight of galactic authority. Your species has provided the galaxy with a solution that will transform the very nature of civilization itself. Trade routes that required months of travel will become instantaneous. Emergency aid can reach any world in moments. The barriers between species and worlds that have defined galactic society for millennia will fall. The council chamber erupted in a symphony of approval as delegates from across the galaxy expressed their amazement and gratitude in languages that had evolved on worlds scattered among the stars. The Keth mathematicians created harmonic frequencies that spoke of mathematical beauty beyond their previous understanding. The Vorlak representatives swirled their gaseous forms into patterns that conveyed wonder and respect. The Praxis collective's unified voice filled the chamber as they spoke for their entire species. The human approach to this problem reveals a fundamental truth about the nature of intelligence itself, they said, their words carrying the authority of millions of minds working in perfect harmony. Advanced computational power and complex theoretical frameworks are not always the path to understanding. Sometimes the most profound insights come from the simplest changes in perspective. Ray felt the weight of history pressing down on him as he responded to the council's questions about his discovery. The solution that had seemed so obvious to his human mind was being hailed as one of the greatest breakthroughs in galactic history, a demonstration that the newest species in the galaxy could offer unique perspectives that their more advanced neighbors had missed. The Alterian Prime Minister made an offer that had never been extended to a member of any non-Alterian species. We invite you to accept the position of Chief Scientific Advisor to the Galactic Council, he said, his ancient eyes fixed on Ray with an intensity that spoke of the magnitude of the honor being offered. Your insights into the nature of mathematical problems could help us solve challenges that have persisted for centuries. Ray considered the offer carefully, understanding the implications of accepting such a position. He would become the first human to hold a position of authority in the galactic government, representing his species at the highest levels of interstellar politics and science. But the responsibility would also mean leaving Earth permanently, dedicating his life to solving problems for civilizations that span the galaxy. I am honored by your offer, Ray replied, his voice carrying the respect that such a proposal deserved. But I believe I can serve the galaxy better by returning to my research and working to establish programs that will allow humans and aliens to collaborate on future challenges. The solution to your equation came not from superior intelligence, but from a different way of thinking about problems. Perhaps the greatest gift my species can offer is to share that perspective with others. The Council accepted his decision with the grace that came from centuries of diplomatic experience, but other offers continued to arrive from across the galaxy. The Keth wanted to establish joint research facilities that would combine human intuitive problem-solving with crystalline computational power. The Vorlak proposed cultural exchange programs that would allow their species to understand how humans could see solutions that multiple advanced civilizations had missed, the Praxis Collective made the most intriguing offer of all, requesting that Ray help them establish the first interspecies institute for intuitive mathematics, where human creativity would be paired with alien computational abilities to tackle the greatest challenges facing galactic civilization. The project would represent a new approach to scientific research, one that valued different ways of thinking about problems rather than simply applying more computational power to existing methods. Ray accepted the Praxis proposal, understanding that it represented the best way to share humanity's unique perspective with the galaxy while respecting the advanced capabilities of the other species. The institute would be located on a neutral world, staffed by researchers from across the galaxy who were willing to learn from each other's approaches to impossible problems. The construction of the institute began within months, with engineering teams from every major species working together to create a facility that would serve as a model for future interspecies cooperation. The building itself was a marvel of collaborative design, incorporating architectural elements from dozens of different worlds and cultures into a unified structure that celebrated the diversity of galactic civilization. Ray found himself directing the Institute's first research projects, working with alien colleagues whose minds operated in ways that pushed the boundaries of his understanding. The Keth mathematicians brought computational power that could process calculations across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Vorlak offered the ability to think 17 different thoughts at once, each one as complex as the greatest human philosophers had ever managed. The Praxis Collective provided the infrastructure for truly collaborative research, their unified consciousness serving as a communication network that allowed researchers from different species to share ideas and insights in real time. The Institute became a place where the barriers between different forms of intelligence dissolved, replaced by a shared commitment to understanding the universe's greatest mysteries. The first major breakthrough came within a year of the Institute's founding, when a team of human and alien researchers solved a problem in quantum mechanics that had puzzled scientists for centuries. The solution came from applying the same principle that had unlocked the temporal displacement equation. Instead of fighting against the apparent paradoxes of quantum reality, they learned to work with them. More discoveries followed as the Institute's reputation spread across the galaxy. Species that had worked in isolation for millennia began sending their best researchers to learn from the human approach to impossible problems. The building became a hub of innovation where the greatest challenges facing galactic civilization were approached with fresh perspectives and creative thinking. Ray often found himself standing in the Institute's central observatory, watching ships from across the galaxy arrive and depart using the transportation technology that his simple solution had made possible. The quantum gates that had been constructed in orbit around major worlds glowed with the same ethereal light he had first seen in the test chamber on Meridian Prime's moon. Trade vessels that once took months to travel between star systems now completed their journeys in moments. The transformation of galactic society had been swift and profound. Emergency medical supplies could reach distant colonies within minutes of a crisis being reported. Scientific expeditions to the edge of known space could maintain constant communication and supply lines with their home worlds. Cultural exchanges between species that had never met became routine, with artists and philosophers traveling instantly between worlds that had been separated by impossible distances. But perhaps the most significant change was in the way the galaxy approached scientific challenges. The human method of looking for simple solutions to complex problems had become a standard, part of research methodology across dozens of species. Universities and research institutions began teaching courses in intuitive problem solving, recognizing that advanced computational power was not always the answer to impossible questions. Ray received regular reports from Earth about the changes that humanity's new status had brought to his home world. The planet that had once been considered a primitive backwater was now seen as the source of revolutionary thinking that could transform galactic civilization. Human scientists and philosophers were in demand across the galaxy, Their unique perspectives valued by species whose technologies were centuries ahead of anything Earth had ever produced. The Alterian Council had established permanent research partnerships with Earth's universities, providing access to technologies and knowledge that accelerated human scientific development by centuries. The Keth had begun teaching human mathematics students to work with their crystalline computational matrices, creating hybrid approaches to problem-solving that neither species could have achieved alone. The Vorlak had shared their methods for parallel thinking with human researchers, leading to breakthroughs in cognitive science that revealed new ways of understanding consciousness and intelligence. The Praxis Collective had invited human philosophers to join their unified consciousness temporarily, creating experiences that challenged everything humanity thought they knew about the nature of individual and collective thought. Raison. Life had changed in ways he could never have imagined when he first walked into the Great Hall on Meridian Prime. He had become one of the most respected scientists in the galaxy, not because of his computational abilities or theoretical knowledge, but because of his willingness to see problems from angles that others had missed. His simple tablet computer had been replaced with alien technologies that could process information at incredible speeds, but he still preferred to work out his ideas by hand, using the same intuitive methods his grandmother had taught him with. Crossword puzzles. The Institute had grown beyond its original mandate, becoming a symbol of what different species could accomplish when they worked together rather than in isolation. Researchers from across the galaxy came to study not just the specific solutions that human creativity had provided, but the underlying approach that made such breakthroughs possible. Standing in his office overlooking the Institute's gardens, where plants from hundreds of worlds grew together in impossible harmony, Ray reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The equation that had stumped the galaxy's greatest minds for centuries had been solved not through superior intelligence or massive computational power, but through the simple recognition that sometimes the most obvious answer was the right one. The galaxy had learned to embrace the human paradox, the tendency of Earth's children to find simple solutions to complex problems, through intuitive thinking rather than brute force calculation. It had become a reminder that intelligence took many forms, and that the newest species in the galaxy could offer perspectives that their more advanced neighbors had never considered. Ray smiled as he watched the latest group of alien students working in the gardens below. Their various forms bent over human-designed experiments that challenged their assumptions about the nature of reality. The future of galactic civilization would be built on collaboration and mutual understanding, with each species contributing their unique gifts to the common goal of expanding knowledge and solving impossible problems. The transportation gates glowed in the distance, carrying ships and cargo instantly between worlds that had once been separated by months of travel. The technology that had seemed impossible for centuries was now routine, a testament to the power of human creativity and the willingness of alien civilizations to embrace new ways of thinking. His grandmother would have been proud to see how her lessons about finding simple answers to complex problems had transformed an entire galaxy, proving that sometimes the hardest puzzles really did have the most obvious solutions hiding in plain sight.